All right. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me all right. Welcome to this week's live interview prep Q&A session hosted by MD Consultant. My name is Yusing, and I'm a first-year medical student here at McGill University. I completed my undergraduate education at the University of Toronto with a degree in physiology and their Honors Bachelor's of Science program. So today, I'll be answering a list of questions that have been put together by a few students about the McGill interview, the MMI interview preparation, and just general interview preparation overall. So if you have any questions for me during the course of the session, please feel free to type them in the comment box below, and I'll try to get to as many as I can before our session ends today at 8 p.m. All right, so the first question that we received was, what was the one thing that surprised you or caught you unaware on the day of your interview? So I think the one thing that really surprised, I'll name two things. The one thing that really caught me unaware, especially for the McGill interviews, was they have a very heavy emphasis on acting, and they like to take advantage of the space that they have. And the space that they have really makes it very realistic in terms of the scenarios that they're running. So the acting stations that we have really feel like you're in that kind of situation instead of you're being observed by someone else. And it's a very artificial setting. It's not artificial at all. It feels very natural, and as a result, it makes you really want to put yourself in that situation. So in a sense, I wasn't reacting, or I wasn't trying to act. I was really trying to just react to what the situation was around me. And I thought that was it was something that caught me unaware for sure, but also something that I really enjoyed because essentially it made me want to react to the situation and really see how I would act if I was really put into that situation. Another thing that really surprised me was actually the fact that it was really fun. The MMI stations, or the MMI setup overall, it's a fairly lengthy interview, but it goes by really fast, and especially if when you go through the stations, you start having a little bit of fun with it as well. You start feeling more natural. One thing that I really encountered as well was, even if you have a bad station here and there, and they definitely had bad stations too, you can always reset for the next one, and hopefully the next one will be better. And overall, you can really come away from the MMI feeling like it was a good overall, even if you had a few stations that didn't go so well here and there. So the second question that I got was, how do I reduce stress prior to or on Christmas Day itself? So one way definitely to reduce stress is to arrive as early as you can before interview day. You don't want to be rushing in or having any transportation issues either the night before or the day of the interview day as well. That's actually something that I encountered on one or two of my interviews, and that's something that I wish I could have taken back as well, because these transportation issues could have been avoided, and it's something that if it does happen, can cause considerable amount of stress. So always make sure you try to arrive as early as you can, or at least arrive within a fairly reasonable time. On interview day, and I think throughout interview day itself, it's really important to try and interact with the people that are there. Everyone's sort of in the same situation as you. You're all applicants. I know everyone's very nervous, everyone's very stressed out, all worried about how their interview is going to go. But I think, especially if you get to interact with some of the people that are there, it really helps you both to potentially get to know some of the future classmates that you might have, but also really just to get to have a sense of what the applicants are like, what people are like in general, and also to make a few quick friends who have some common background based on the fact that they're there with you as well. So hopefully sort of having that social interaction, having that social interaction really helped me sort of overcome the stress, especially at the McGill interviews. And it really helped me sort of calm me down and also relate to other people too who were in the same situation as I was. So question 3 was, are there any specific question types or themes that McGill emphasizes in their MMIs? So I think something that McGill definitely tries to emphasize, like I mentioned before, is putting you into situations where you're not describing, but you're really you're really in that scenario or really in that situation in sort of an acting simulated scenario. They have a really good facility to be able to play this out. And actually, when you do get to hopefully see it, you'll see that it's a place where it really allows you to sort of be yourself and immerse yourself into whatever scenario that you're placed into during the interview. And it feels a lot less artificial than maybe some of the other schools who do run MMIs of this similar style have. I think McGill, and I think there's a nice breakdown on the McGill interview, the official McGill interview website as well, but I like to focus on scenarios where you can act or you can sort of demonstrate. They like to focus on sort of problem-solving questions, and they also like to focus on sort of the more traditional personal questions where they ask about your background, your CVPN, if you've applied to McGill, that's what you would have had to submit, which is basically a CV combined with a few essays that you have to write. So be prepared to sort of encounter any kind of scenario between those three. So you can either have acting scenarios, or you can sort of have scenarios where you have to work out a certain problem that they present to you and also be able to explain it well to back to the interviewer, and also to be able to prepare to answer questions based on something that you may have written, either in the essay or in sort of the CV that you handed in. So question 4 was, in the case where you blank out and aren't able to come up with a comprehensive answer, what would I do? So that's something that happened to me a few times, for sure, and not just in the McGill interviews as well, but in other interviews, non-MMI and MMI too. So one thing that I really think is important if you do blank out, is to just ask the interviewer to take some time, that you wanted to take some time and think about it. Maybe they say, is it okay, this is a really good question, is it okay if I take about 5 seconds or so to think about it? And that way you give the interviewer a bit of preparation time, so that you can properly consolidate something that you want to say. And it also lets them prepare for the fact that there's going to be a bit of a wait. So in that sense, it's a really good way to sort of give yourself time and also give them the impression that you're really taking the time to sort of think about this issue carefully. It's one thing that you really don't want to do in that kind of situation is to launch straight into whatever question or whatever response that they asked you, but without really thinking about it, and as a result, you start rambling on something that can be completely unrelated. So that can really sort of lead you astray, especially in an MMI scenario when you don't have much time per station. And as a result, I think it's really important that if you need some time, and you can't come up really with an answer right on the spot, just ask for some time. Say that you need to take 5 seconds, and then that way think through about it in your head. Of course, you don't want to take too long. You don't want to make them wait for like 10 or 15 seconds, but just take 5 to 10 seconds, think it through, and at least have sort of an idea of what you want to say, so that you can proceed with what you want to respond with for the question. So for question 5, let's see. What should I do if I finish responding to a scenario before the clock is up? Should I elaborate some more on what I was saying to fill the time? So I think as a general rule of thumb, the interviewers aren't there to sort of chit-chat. So first of all, it's when you do run out of when you finish what you want to say before the clock is up and you do have some time left over, you definitely don't want to be sort of starting like a casual conversation with the interviewer, because that's not necessarily appropriate behavior at that point. If you do have something that you want to elaborate on that you mentioned before, I think that's perfectly all right as long as it is related to what you were saying, ideally directly before you stop saying it. You don't want to sound like you're rambling just to fill up time, and especially since if it's something that's completely unrelated, that's not something you really want to add onto the end. It is perfectly fine to sort of finish a station early, hopefully not too early, but if you have like say 10 or 20 seconds left, it's alright to say sort of, oh, thank you, and then sit there quietly and wait until the time is up. I've done that one or two times, I think, in my interview sessions, and I think it's good to in that case you want to sort of practice with the time that you're given in your MMI practice before, so that you have a good sense of how much time you have left. Not every place will announce how much time you have left per station. Some MMIs will. I don't remember if the McGill ones do specifically, but you always want to practice with the McGill style if you're doing a McGill interview, so that you have a sense of how long you have to talk, and then that way when you're nearing the end, you sort of have an idea of how much time you may have left, and then if you want to elaborate more, you can if there's too much time left. But if there's only about 10 or 20 seconds left at the end, then I think it's absolutely fine if you sit sort of quietly waiting for the session to end. The important thing is, I think, you don't want to have a bit of an awkward pause and then start rambling on things just because you want to fill out the time, because that doesn't really add much to what you had to say before. Okay, so question 6 is when asked an ethical question, what is your general strategy to tackling that question? So for example, your friend confides in you that he has been feeling depressed lately and thought about committing suicide once a few weeks ago. He asks you not to tell anyone as he thinks he's coping better now. So what possible action should you take and why? So for ethical questions, I think it's really important in sort of the 2 minutes that you have beforehand to establish a framework that you want to approach this. One framework that I came upon when I was preparing was sort of the SPAR framework, which you can use to apply to both ethical scenarios as well as describing your own personal experience as well. So SPAR, or SPAR, is an acronym. So the S stands for situation, or summary. So the first thing I always like to do when I approach an ethical scenario is when I go into the room and introduce myself, after I introduce myself, I always try to summarize the situation as I understand it. So this lets you sort of avoid a few things while also helping you consolidate consolidate what you know about the situation as well. So one, for you, it sort of gives you a summary of what that case is about. And also it helps you sort of remember it better too, when you repeat it once before you start launching into your arguments. The second thing is, if you do understand something incorrectly from what you read, giving that summary will let the interviewers know what your interpretation of whatever that prompt is. And then if there are differences to what your interpretation is versus what their interpretation was, then they can help correct you or make a few small adjustments to your summary or to your understanding of the situation. That way, you know that if you have any corrections that need to make in your arguments, you can make those corrections before you launch into something that you had prepared beforehand, and then end up realizing that it wasn't what the situation was about at all. So that's what S stands for. So summarize that situation. P in SPAR, the P stands for the problem. So here's where you describe that ethical problem that's present in this scenario. So in this scenario, where your friend's confiding in you that he's been feeling depressed lately, and he's asking you not to tell anyone, I think a few problems a few ethical dilemmas that you could really point out here would be the fact that this is your friend, and one, you want to maintain confidentiality because he asks you not to tell anyone. But that's sort of set against the fact that you do want to help him, and you may think that sort of friend support or having someone else to talk to him, not just yourself, may benefit him as well. So that's sort of an ethical dilemma that you could outline in this kind of scenario, and that's really what sort of the P stands for. You want to identify sort of the ethical dilemma that's at stake here, and really point out, one's against the other, or a few are against each other, and here's what the problem really is. So we have covered S, summarize the situation, and P, talk about the problem. And so A in SPAR stands for either sort of the action or the argument that you want to take. So in this kind of scenario, you want to make your argument about whether or not, or your action, about what you want to do following up. So do you want to, would you sort of listen to what your friend telling you and not tell anyone, even though you may think it might benefit him? Or would you include someone else? Because you think that may benefit him more and help him overcome his depression? So that's sort of what the next step really should be after you sort of explain the problem. You want to see what action you want to take or what arguments that you want to make for whatever ethical scenario that you come up with. And then so that's SPAR, or SPA. So R in SPAR would be resolution. So a resolution and sort of reaction as well. So what kind of reactions can you expect from the action that you take? So would you expect your friend to be very angry, depending on what stance you take, or would you expect sort of your friend to not feel as good as you think you might have with another approach? So that's something, the reactions and the counterpoints that you make to your arguments are really important, because it shows that you've considered the ethical scenario very seriously, and you've also sort of considered what the interviewers might say to counter your argument. Chances are, no matter if you make counter arguments or not, the interviewers will make counter arguments against you because they want to sort of test how you react to sort of challenges to what you believe in. So it's good to sort of preemptively answer that and address any counterpoints that you have, and then that way it really shows your depth of understanding and that you've thought the situation through very thoroughly. Okay, so for the next question, how did I prepare for my interviews and how many hours did I spend preparing? So I have to admit I didn't prepare nearly as much as I would have liked to. I started preparing fairly late before the interviews actually started. But I tried to make the most of the time that I did have, trying to balance schoolwork and preparation for other things as well. So one thing that I really tried to do when I was preparing for interviews was to talk to friends or talk to people who were close to me to help me prepare for the interviews, prepare for the ethical scenarios. It's really one thing to practice yourself, and sort of go through that whole 2-minute preparation followed by maybe an introductory statement to whatever prompt that you're given. But you really want to try and engage someone else so that they can give you the full experience of sort of giving you 2 minutes to prepare and then 7 or 8 minutes to answer whatever prompt that is with counter arguments. Because by yourself, you're not able to give yourself counter arguments and argue against those too. So I think it's really valuable, and it's something that I try to take advantage of, to include other people and other people who were close to me so that they could help me practice not just different prompts, but also sort of the formatting, the time, and then continuously having multiple 10-minute stations back to back as well to sort of get a sense of what it really feels like on interview day. So the next question also sort of ties into that. What are some preparation methods and resources that you found especially effective for preparing for multiple mini interviews? So in addition to sort of finding big lists of MMI questions online, and there are a ton of sort of big lists online that are out there, one thing that I really found valuable for preparing the stations where you have to talk about ethics and things that are sort of going on in the world right now. One thing that I really found that was important was just to read up on sort of current medical news or current controversies that are surrounding sort of medicine in Canada right now. One resource that I really found helpful for that was is the podcast called White Coat Black Art. It's a CBC podcast run by an emergency physician down in Toronto, but they're very easy to listen to, these podcasts, and they really try to address some of the controversial or topics that may or may not be talked much about in the mainstream media today. So I found that was a really nice synthesis of sort of things that were going on in healthcare right now, and also helped me learn a lot more about the healthcare system. And I think I actually used some of the material that I heard on that podcast in some of my interviews too. So you never know if it might actually come up, but if it does, then it's a good resource that you know that you'll have used beforehand. Otherwise, the internet has a ton of really, really comprehensive MMI, a list of MMI questions out there. I think there are some lists that go with that list like hundreds and hundreds of questions. So take a look at those. Try to go through quite a few of those with as much of a variety as you can. And I think that will really help you prepare for anything that you may encounter during the MMI as well. So the next question was, what is an effective way to practice for acting stations? So that really plays into sort of what I mentioned before. For acting especially, even more so for sort of the ethical scenarios, you really have to have someone alongside with you that can really act out that scenario too. Ideally, someone that will help you in a serious manner, someone that won't like laugh at your acting, because the interviewers certainly won't laugh, or the actors at that scenario certainly won't laugh. So you want to make sure that you have someone who can really help you through with that entire scenario, and also try to like react in a sort of a realistic manner too, similar to how a person in that real situation would act. So like say if you were in where you have to break bad news to someone, let's say as an interview station, you have to break bad news to someone that you accidentally ran over your neighbor's pet, and you were meeting their neighbor. So that was sort of the scenario. You have to be prepared for that neighbor to react in however way that you think a neighbor would react. So you want to try and find someone that could sort of reflect that accurately, and someone that will hopefully put you into a comfortable position so that you can react appropriately too. Like I said before, the MMIs, I think especially at McGill, have a really good system and a really good center that will really help put you into that mindset. So I think that may facilitate sort of your reaction skills and how you react to certain situations. But when you're at home practicing, I think it's really important to find someone and find a setting that you think you can be comfortable reacting, and for your friend or your close one to act in a realistic manner too. So the next question was, how would I prepare for an interview not knowing if I would receive an invite or if you're on the wait list? So I think always try to prepare for interviews assuming that you would have an interview that you have to prepare for. It's always better to be over-prepared for interviews compared to like assuming that you don't have an interview and then not preparing at all and hearing back successfully, but then putting you into a state of panic where you haven't prepared as much as you wanted to. So like when I was trying to prepare for interviews, I tried to start before I heard back from any interview invites at all. And you always want to prepare for all of the interview types possible. So you want to prepare for MMI stations. You want to prepare for sort of the MPI station that Toronto runs. And you also want to try to prepare for panel interviews as well. So I think it's good to, in your practice, always have a nice mix of running through ethical scenarios, like going through those big MMI list questions, but also really know your CV or sort of personal experiences that come off your CV really well too. For example, for OMSAS, when you're making that big list of extracurricular activities or awards or things like that you have to compile, you want to try to pick out a few of those and really try to think back and remember experiences that really stood out to you. And then I think those experiences will really be something that you can talk about a lot, both in your personal kind of interviews, so in the panel or in personal MMI stations, and personal MPI stations as well. But also those personal experiences will really help sort of build your ethical scenario, how you react and how you respond to an ethical scenario as well. If you've had a similar situation to what the ethical dilemma presents, then you can really use your experiences to build off that too. But in general, always prepare, assuming that you have an invitation, even if ultimately, unfortunately, you don't receive one, or if you get placed on the wait list, because it's always better to be more prepared than underprepared. So the last question that we have was, what was one thing I wish I could have done differently while I was preparing for interviews? So one thing that I wish I would have done differently was, like I mentioned before, to not have as many transportation issues. So I always try to arrange to be to be there, hopefully at least early the day before. That way you don't run into any stress about arriving on time, or even like on the day of the interview itself, making sure that transportation is adequate, and then you know how to get to where you need to go for interviewing. For the interview itself, one thing I think I would have liked to have done differently was to sort of practice with as many different people as possible. And that's sort of why I really encouraged practicing with friends too. I didn't practice with as many people as I would have liked. I practiced with one or two sort of close friends that I felt comfortable with practicing, because especially for the acting scenarios, it's tough to sort of be yourself or really act out how you would want to react if you're not comfortable with the person that's sort of practicing opposite you. But I think you want to try and expand as much as possible, because the more people that you interact with, you'll see more and more different styles and more different kinds of reactions that you may get to. So the more people that you get to interact with, I think, and practice with, I think the better you'll be at reacting to whatever unexpected scenario that you may come with on the MMI. Ultimately, you'll never be fully prepared for the MMI in the sense that it's highly unlikely that you'll have seen every single kind of station there. So in that sense, that's why I'm saying it's very important to try to practice with as many people as possible and with as many different situations as possible, so you really sort of practice how you react or how you respond in every kind of different scenario that you can come up with on an MMI. I think there are some really good resources on things like prep, or on things like pre-med prep, or sort of those online forums where you can sort of set up different groups of people who are all applying to medical school and want to practice together. So I think those might be really good resources to use if you want to get a big group of people that you can potentially interact with. All right, so now we're nearing the end of our talk, but we definitely have a few minutes left for any questions that you may have. So if you have any questions, feel free to post sort of in the comment page below, and I'll do my best to answer them if you have any questions available. Okay, I'm just checking the Facebook page right now to see if anyone does have any questions. Let's see. Okay, great. So I do have one question in the comments right now. So the question I was asked was, what question types are most challenging to me? So for me personally, I think the ethical scenarios where I have to explain what would I have to do are definitely the most challenging. And that's why I sort of wanted to have a framework for how I want to respond to it, the SPAR framework that I described previously. That's why I really want to try to use that framework, because ethical scenarios or explaining through ethical scenarios are really something that was sort of artificial to me, and something that I found really challenging, because I had to sort of think of what the problem is and sort of how I would react to it, and sort of counterpoints to that, but arrange all of that response into a coherent sort of logical format too. So that's something I found really challenging. But as you get more practice with ethical scenarios, and as you get more practice practicing with other people, they can also sort of critique you and help give you tips on how to organize your initial introductory statement better. And that's something that does come with practice. But if you try to follow sort of a logical format and you practice with that logical format, eventually that will sort of become second nature, and then you'll be able to follow that format as you're sort of explaining through any ethical scenario or any personal experience as well. So another question that I received is the fact that I mentioned stations at one point about the MMI. So at McGill, I'm sorry if I don't answer your question directly. If I don't answer the question directly, please let me know. But from what I'm interpreting the question to be, the stations at McGill specifically for the MMI, they're usually arranged so that each station is in a separate room. And then the rooms are all in sort of the same area. So what you would do is everyone starts at a different room within a certain circuit. And then when the bell rings, you'll have usually 2 minutes to read the prompt that's posted outside the door. You're not allowed to read the prompt until after the bell sort of begins, but once the circuit sort of begins, then you'll have that sort of 2 minute to read the prompt, followed by however many minutes. I think at McGill it's 7, but at other schools it may be 8. So you'll have that long time to sort of go inside, introduce yourself, and then sort of proceed and answer whatever that prompt was there. Or if it's an acting scenario, then you act out the scenario that's there too. So it'll be a cycle of 2 minutes to 7 to 8 minutes answering. And then once you're done, you stop when the bell rings. And there will be usually a bell that's telling you, oh, your time, or like your 7 minutes are up. Please exit the room and proceed to the following station. So at that signal, you'll exit the room. You'll thank the interviewer and then exit the room, and then you'll move straight to the next station and you'll start reading the prompt there. So that 2 minutes that you get to read the prompt will start right when you exit the room. So there's very little turnover time, but hopefully, especially at McGill and at other MMI interviews as well, it tends to usually run very smoothly, and they have a very structured system of running things too. So it shouldn't be a problem there. Hopefully that answers your question, though. Okay. Are there any other questions that you have about MMI prep or McGill MMI prep specifically? All right, so if there are no other questions, I think it's nearing the end of our session now. So thank you for joining our session today. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to email them to info@mdconsultants.ca. So I'll repeat that again. It's info@mdconsultants.ca. Or you can direct message the questions to us over Facebook through the MD Consultants Facebook page here. And we'll try to answer them the best we can at next Thursday's Facebook Live session as well. All right, so thank you very much for listening, and best of luck at your future medical interviews or at your future medical interviews. And I wish you all to have very good success. Have a good night.